OAW. That acronym alone was enough to make my skin crawl, enough to keep me up at night ever since I moved into Aurora Pines Estates. And on a chilly October afternoon, I discovered just how cruel the people behind those three letters could be, especially their president, Miss Avery Lockhart. She thought her authority over our homeowners association was limitless. She believed she could do anything to anyone without consequence, but she had no idea who I was or the power I held. She had no clue that I worked for the Department of Justice, and she certainly didn't anticipate that her repeated slaps against my disabled daughter would trigger every ounce of legal and personal wrath I could muster. I'll never forget the sting in the air that day. The wind carried a brittle hint of winter, rustling through the tall pines skirting our suburban enclave. The asphalt road leading to my home was freshly laid, dark and glossy, a clear sign of the steep HOA fees we'd all been paying. My name is Nolan Alvarez. I'm a father of one beautiful girl named Alexa. She's 12 years old, and although cerebral palsy limits her mobility, it can't restrain her bright spirit. My wife passed away a few years ago in a car accident. Raising Alexa alone was painful at first, but over time, I found a rhythm, until Avery's meddling turned that rhythm into chaos. The only reason I agreed to buy a property here was its proximity to specialized therapy centers. I wanted Alexa to have the best support possible. Ironically, I ended up walking into a nightmare orchestrated by the HOA. That Sunday started out peaceful enough. I was inside the garage rummaging for a missing wrench, and Alexa was in our front yard doodling with colored chalk. She loves drawing butterflies, pastel rainbows, swirling galaxies, anything that lets her imagination run free. Since we'd moved in, she'd found solace in that activity, especially when her body felt stiff or her confidence dipped. And I was just grateful she had a hobby she could do at her own pace. A few neighbors passed by, waving politely. I recall thinking that it might actually be a decent day. Then, at around 3 in the afternoon, a glossy black SUV pulled up in front of my driveway. Out stepped Avery Lockhart, dressed in a fitted pencil skirt, crisp blouse, and heels that clicked ominously on the pavement. She had that expression I'd grown accustomed to seeing at HOA meetings. Pinched lips, furrowed brow, posture so rigid it seemed sculpted from ice. I sighed, thinking perhaps she came to complain about the color of the mulch in my flower beds, or to deliver yet another letter about recycling bins being visible from the street. But I never expected what happened next. She marched up to Alexa, still seated by the edge of our driveway with her chalk, and demanded that my daughters stop defacing community property. My daughter's chalk drawing spanned a small patch of concrete near the lawn. It was fully on our lot. No portion had extended out to the sidewalk. Avery, however, insisted Alexa's art was unsightly graffiti, tarnishing the neighborhood's aesthetic. Alexa, startled, tried to explain that it was just chalk, easily washable, but Avery cut her off. Her eyes blazed with a contempt that made my stomach clench. Then she raised her hand. Before Alexa could even process what was happening, Avery slapped her. My daughter let out a startled yelp, toppling sideways. Her wheelchair was parked by the porch, so she had been sitting on a low stool to reach the concrete easily. That stool wobbled, nearly spilling her onto the ground. I froze in horror. From inside the garage, I watched as Alexa burst into tears. She lifted a trembling hand to her cheek, red from the force of impact. I lurched forward, shouting, "What are you doing?" Avery turned toward me, but her anger only grew. She spat out that Alexa was a nuisance. She hissed that these kids with their special needs were not entitled to ruin the appearance of her precious HOA. Then she slapped my daughter a second time. I can't even find words to describe the rage that surged through me. It was white-hot, primal, a father's fury unleashed. I dashed forward, thoughts colliding in my head, yet instinct guided me to protect my child first. Alexa's tears were streaming, her eyes filled with confusion and pain. My chest pounded like a drum. All I could manage at that moment was to stand between them. My shoulders squared as I glared at Avery. She dared to step back, crossing her arms. I'm the president of this homeowners association. I have every right to stop your child from vandalizing the neighborhood." The gall in her voice was staggering. The neighbors, who had momentarily stopped to look, seemed conflicted about intervening. Avery's aura of authority weighed on them like a dark cloud. Still, I could see some of them filming with their phones, hopefully capturing the exact moment Avery raised her hand to strike a second time. I crouched beside Alexa, gently touching her swollen cheek. She winced, lip quivering. "I'm sorry, sweetie. This shouldn't have happened." She sniffled. I felt a knot in my throat. All the while, Avery stood there, arms folded, feigning complete righteousness. I inhaled sharply, refusing to let my temper push me into a mistake. The last thing I needed was for the Department of Justice to hear I had assaulted a woman, though God knows she deserved a confrontation, but I had to keep my composure. I had to ensure justice was served properly. "Go back inside, Alexa," I whispered. "Please, wait for me." My daughter wiped her tears, shakily rose, and rolled to her wheelchair. She maneuvered it slowly toward the ramp my brother and I had installed, a ramp Avery repeatedly complained about for months, claiming it didn't match the colonial style of the neighborhood. My blood boiled, but I stayed. I needed to face this bully. I needed to let her know she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She stared at me haughtily, her posture reminiscent of a queen addressing a peasant. "Is that ramp even compliant with our bylaws? I'm getting tired of your blatant disregard for Aurora Pines rules." I clenched my teeth. "Bylaws do not give you the right to physically harm my daughter," I said. My voice quivered with quiet fury. "You're going to regret what you did." Avery flicked her hand as though swatting a fly. "Oh, spare me your threats. Around here, I call the shots. You're just a tenant of this place, and I have full authority to penalize you or evict you if I see fit." My fingers curled into fists. If only she knew the extent of the power I held, not from an HOA standpoint, but from a legal one. I inhaled deeply, deciding not to reveal that card yet. Instead, I turned to the neighbors who had gathered. "You all saw that," I said. "She assaulted my daughter." One older woman, Mrs. Dean, nodded timidly. A younger man, Carl, stuttered something about capturing footage on his phone. A few others hovered at the perimeter, uncertain but appalled. Avery took a step forward. "All of you, mind your own business. This is strictly an HOA affair." Her shrill demand clashed with the hush that had fallen over the small crowd. For a fleeting moment, no one dared move. Then, a faint siren sounded in the distance. My heart leapt. Someone must have dialed 911. I prayed the arriving officer would handle this fairly, that we wouldn't be subjected to the usual rigmarole that sometimes arises when HOAs claim private jurisdiction. I glanced toward Alexa, who was near the front door, crying softly. I mouthed, "Stay inside." She nodded. She seemed terrified. That image burned into my mind. My daughter, trembling from an assault, while this arrogant woman from the HOA stood there, unwavering in her sense of self-righteousness. Before the patrol car pulled up, Avery tried to slink back to her SUV. "Don't you dare leave," I growled. "You assaulted a minor." She paused, a flicker of uncertainty passing over her face. Then she tossed her hair, muttering under her breath that everything would be sorted out once the authorities arrived. Around that moment, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see the Baileys. An older couple next door emerged from their porch. Mrs. Bailey, hands trembling, said she'd seen Avery strike Alexa. Her husband, stoic and frowning, simply shook his head. The faint wail of sirens grew louder. The tension around us thickened until the police car finally appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac. 2 officers stepped out. One of them, a tall man with a serious face, walked up to us, scanning the scene. I took a breath and approached the officer. "My daughter was assaulted by this woman," I said. "She slapped her at least twice. People witnessed it." The officer's brow creased. He turned to Avery, who looked insulted by the idea that she had to explain herself. "He's exaggerating," she declared. "I barely touched her. She was defacing private property." My driveway is my property, I corrected, and chalk isn't permanent. This is assault, plain and simple. The officer questioned the onlookers, taking statements. The tension mounted as the second officer approached Avery's SUV, likely running her plates. Avery insisted she was just doing her job as HOA president, stopping vandalism. I noticed the officer's expression shift from neutral to perplexed, then to a glimmer of disbelief at her arrogance. A short while later, the officer asked Alexa to come out so he could check on her injuries. I felt uneasy about putting her through more emotional stress, but it was necessary. She rolled herself out carefully in her wheelchair, a small bag of ice pressed against her cheek. Her eyes were still red, though she tried to keep composure. The officer knelt down to her level. He asked what happened. Alexa recounted the event in a shaky voice, describing how Ms. Lockhart had demanded she stop drawing and then struck her without warning. "And then she called me a worthless cripple," Alexa murmured, tears threatening again. That detail caused a collective gasp from the neighbors. Avery's face paled. She shook her head vehemently, claiming Alexa was fabricating. But the bystanders confirmed hearing insults directed at Alexa's disability. I held my breath, wondering if the officer would arrest Avery on the spot or simply take a report. Assaulting a disabled minor is a serious offense. It could lead to enhanced charges if deemed a hate crime. Avery seemed to sense the danger she was in. She raised her voice, trying to reassert dominance. "Look, I'm on the board with the mayor's charity council. My husband golfs with Judge Peterson. I am not some petty criminal. This family's been nothing but trouble, installing that tacky ramp and ignoring our community guidelines." The officer fixed her with a stern stare. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Based on witness statements, we have grounds to believe you assaulted this child." She scoffed, crossing her arms again. "You people have no idea who you're dealing with. Aurora Pines Estates belongs to me in spirit." That was my cue to step in. Something inside me snapped. I was done playing polite citizen. I turned to the officer, speaking in a measured tone. "Sir, I haven't disclosed my profession, but I believe it's relevant now. I'm an attorney with the Department of Justice. I specialize in cases involving civil rights violations." Gasps rippled across the small gathering. Avery's head whipped in my direction, eyes brimming with sudden uncertainty. "If Miss Lockhart is going to pull rank, I'd like to do the same," I continued. "You should know I'm fully aware of the severity of assaulting a disabled minor, and if those slurs are confirmed, it may constitute a hate crime under federal guidelines." Avery's composure cracked. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it by pretending to smooth her blouse. "This is an overreaction," she stammered. "You can't possibly be serious. I was doing my job." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. He nodded once. They moved to detain Avery. She tried to step away, but they instructed her to place her hands behind her back. I watched as they read her Miranda rights, my breathing unsteady with a mixture of relief and lingering fury. A wave of murmurs swept through the neighbors, some appearing shocked, others oddly satisfied that justice was being served. Amid that swirl of tension, I felt Alexa's hand tug gently at my sleeve. She whispered that she was in pain. My heart clenched. I crouched beside her wheelchair. "Let me take you inside, okay?" I turned to the officers. "I'll be more than willing to provide a full statement. I just need to get my daughter some proper care first." They nodded sympathetically, one of them handing me a card with a case number and instructions to contact them after we'd seen a doctor. Meanwhile, Avery was led toward the squad car, her indignant protests echoing. "You'll regret this," she said. "I run this community, and I know every powerful person in this county." I didn't dignify her with a reply. I simply watched the doors slam shut behind her. My little girl deserved better than living in fear. We spent that evening in the emergency room. Alexa's cheek was bruised. She also complained of pain in her neck because the force had jerked her head sideways. The doctor examined her carefully, then gave her mild pain medication. I felt guilty for not intercepting the second slap, though everything happened so quickly. She looked drained, wanting nothing but to lie in her bed at home. By the time we returned, it was almost midnight. I wheeled Alexa up the ramp Avery so despised and wondered how someone could harbor such hostility. That night, after tucking Alexa into bed, I paced around the living room, uncertain of what the next steps would be. There was no doubt in my mind that I would press charges. Assaulting a disabled child was unforgivable, but in addition to the personal dimension, I sensed a larger, more sinister network behind Avery. Her repeated mentions of golfing with judges, socializing with the mayor, and calling the shots in Aurora Pines led me to suspect she had deep connections. Perhaps I was overthinking it, but my gut told me there was more at play than just her petty tyranny over HOA rules. Days passed. Avery posted bail the following morning, and soon an official notice from the HOA arrived in my mailbox. It threatened to fine me for the chalk vandalism, claiming it defaced community property. They also threatened to review my ramp installation again to ensure it met aesthetic guidelines. I stared at the letter in disbelief. They had the audacity to continue harassing us even after their president was arrested for assault. My blood simmered. This was bigger than a single slap. The entire system in Aurora Pines Estates seemed rotten. I decided to contact my colleagues at the Department of Justice to see if any existing complaints about Aurora Pines or Avery's leadership had surfaced. Sure enough, as soon as I made a few discreet inquiries, I discovered some documents detailing a possible land use violation involving the HOA board. They appeared to be pushing a development project that encroached on a protected wetland area near the northern edge of the neighborhood. Some residents had tried to protest it, fearing environmental damage and flooding risks, but those concerns were brushed aside. Allegedly, Avery and her allies bribed local officials to overlook the issue. The deeper I dug, the more disgusted I became. How many families had she bullied into silence? One family had apparently tried to speak up about the wetlands destruction, and they'd been slapped with massive fines for unauthorized landscaping. Another had a wheelchair-bound grandmother who needed a ramp, and they too were bombarded with vague violations until they gave up and moved. This pattern echoed a broader conspiracy of intimidation and extortion. My role in the DOJ positioned me to act, but I also needed clear, undeniable evidence. It was around this time that a surprising ally stepped forward. Her name was Colette Morgan. She'd recently resigned from the HOA board in protest of Avery's tactics. She reached out via a handwritten note slipped under my door, explaining that she had crucial documents detailing Avery's financial dealings with a local construction firm. According to her note, these documents linked Avery, the firm, and certain city council members she wanted to meet discreetly. I was more than willing to listen. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. I arrived first, scanning the parking lot warily. She showed up in a dark coat and sunglasses, like a character from a spy novel. She introduced herself nervously, apologizing for any inconvenience. Then she slid a folder across the table. Avery and her husband have been paying off the city's planning committee to rezone that wetland, Colette whispered, her voice cracking. They want to build luxury condos. It'll destroy the ecosystem, and any resident who dares question them is threatened with fines, bogus rule violations, or worse. They've done it before, and they'll do it again. I opened the folder, flipping through spreadsheets, copies of emails, even scanned, signed checks. It was a goldmine of incriminating material. It painted a picture of unbridled corruption. "Why give this to me?" I asked. Colette lowered her gaze. "Because you're the only one with the authority to stop them. The rest of us are powerless, and after what Avery did to your daughter, I can't stand by." My heart pounded. This was it. The smoking gun that could take Avery down for more than just assault. "Thank you," I said, slipping the documents into my briefcase. "You're doing the right thing. I promise to handle this carefully." Back at home, Alexa was napping. The medication sometimes made her drowsy. I kissed her forehead, wishing she never had to witness such cruelty again. In my study, I scrutinized every page Colette had provided. The evidence was substantial. If we built a case on these documents, Avery wouldn't just face assault charges. She'd potentially face federal charges for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. However, I needed more specifics, especially connecting the mayor and the city council to these under-the-table dealings. Working with local authorities could be tricky if they were in Avery's pocket, so I considered going straight to my boss at the DOJ. Yet I hesitated, aware that stepping in might also compromise my personal involvement in the assault case. That week, our local police detective, a man named Roland Harris, visited to take a more thorough statement. Detective Harris was direct, seemingly unimpressed by Avery's connections. He told me he'd encountered her strong-arming behavior before, but never had enough witness cooperation to charge her. People around here are terrified. They pay their dues and keep quiet, or they risk losing everything. I told him about my suspicion of deeper corruption, though I didn't mention the folder from Colette. He gave me a grim nod, as if confirming a suspicion he'd long harbored. "I can't do much about the wetlands fiasco," he admitted, "but I can press charges for the assault. We have multiple witnesses, plus the disabled hate crime angle. That's huge." Avery's upcoming court date for the assault was scheduled 2 weeks away. I felt impatient, determined to see real justice done. Meanwhile, Alexa tried to maintain her routine, but her bruised cheek and shaken spirit made it hard. She asked me questions like, "Why did Ms. Lockhart hate me so much? And did I do something wrong?" Each query ripped my heart open. I explained that none of it was her fault. She'd been singled out because that woman saw her as an easy target, which infuriated me more. My colleagues at the DOJ recommended I gather as much local testimony as possible from other victims. This was a subtle instruction. Since I was personally involved, the office had to be careful, but I took it seriously. I started knocking on neighbors' doors. Some were wary, reluctant to talk. Others opened up, recounting how Avery had bullied them over minor infractions, painting their shutters the wrong shade, hosting a party that went 5 minutes past noise curfew, letting their hedges grow an inch too high. One older gentleman recalled a time he'd parked his RV in his driveway overnight, just once, and Avery slapped him with a $500 0-cents fine. Another tearful resident told me about how she got threatened with foreclosure for failing to pay a supposed architectural review fee that didn't even exist in the bylaws. All these stories confirmed a pattern of abuse. But I wanted evidence that Avery's control extended beyond these petty HOA complaints. I asked them about the wetland. Some nodded vigorously, describing how they used to enjoy walks there, how beavers lived in the stream. Recently, they noticed construction stakes, piles of gravel, even fences going up. Yet no official notice had been posted, no public hearing was held. It reeked of something illegal. Each conversation left me more determined to bring Avery and her cronies to justice. They were not just tormenting individuals, but also jeopardizing an ecosystem that belonged to everyone. Word traveled that Avery had posted a bond so high that it staggered even the local attorneys. It was rumored her father left her a significant inheritance. Combined with her husband's lucrative deals, she had nearly limitless resources. The folks around the neighborhood asked if I worried about retaliation. I did. But what kept me resolute was the memory of her hand striking my daughter's face. She might have money, but that didn't place her above the law. On a crisp morning just a few days before Avery's first hearing, I spotted her pacing outside the community clubhouse, flanked by 2 stern-faced men in suits. She glanced at me with daggers in her eyes. I ignored her, but then her voice cut through the air. "You're going to pay for this, Alvarez," she hissed. "You have no idea the kind of people I know." I clenched my jaw, refusing to engage in a shouting match. In truth, the mention of powerful contacts worried me a bit. Some of them might indeed hold sway over local courts, but I'd place my trust in the federal justice system if needed. That afternoon, Colette texted me from a burner phone, urging caution. She believed Avery's husband, Joel Lockhart, had connections with a contractor who specialized in gray ops, dirty tactics like intimidation. My mind raced. Could Alexa be in danger? I tightened our home security, changed the locks, installed cameras, and asked my neighbor Harriet, a kind, retired teacher, to keep watch when I wasn't around. Harriet was more than happy to help, outraged at what Alexa had endured. The day of Avery's preliminary hearing arrived in a swirl of anxiety. Alexa and I headed to the courthouse. My daughter clung to me, her cheeks pale. She wore a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. We sat in the waiting area, ignoring the curious stares from passers-by. Avery eventually appeared with a high-prized lawyer. They didn't even glance our way, but I sensed tension radiating from them like heat off asphalt. The prosecutor outlined the case: assault on a disabled minor, potential hate crime charges due to the slurs. The defense attorney tried to spin it as a minor dispute over property rules, an HOA matter that got out of hand. They pled not guilty. The judge set a trial date. My teeth ground in frustration as they walked out, looking smug. But the wheels of justice turned slowly. I knew that from experience. I decided this was the moment to bring my folder of evidence to the FBI field office in the adjacent county. Interagency protocols can be complicated, but I had enough justification to open an investigation into possible corruption involving Avery, local officials, and the wetlands fiasco. I braced myself for a protracted battle. In the meantime, I had to keep Alexa safe. Part of me wondered if I should move us out of Aurora Pines altogether, but that felt like letting them win. I wanted to stand my ground. As the days passed, tension throughout the community escalated. A sign was posted at the north end of Aurora Pines, advertising future site of Maplewood luxury villas. Residents were confused. There had been no official meeting about it. That night, a small group of concerned neighbors met in my living room. We discussed the seriousness of the situation. Bulldozers had been seen scouting the wetland edges. One woman, Linda Wu, cried as she described the songbirds that used to nest in that area. Another man, Eric Carter, shared how his property value might plummet if that wetland were destroyed, as it could increase flood risks. I told them I'd already involved federal agencies. They seemed relieved but also terrified, fearful of Avery's retribution. As we spoke, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I picked up hesitantly. A menacing voice threatened that, if I didn't withdraw my accusations, Alexa and I would face the consequences. My stomach lurched. I ended the call, adrenaline surging through my veins. Everyone in the room fell silent as I relayed the gist of the threat. Harriet, ever composed, simply said, "We stand together." Their solidarity touched me deeply. A few days later, our mailbox was smashed in. Graffiti reading "Liar" was sprayed on our garage door. Alexa broke into tears upon seeing it, scared and confused. I tried to keep calm, telling her it was a desperate move by people who knew they were losing. Inside, my anger simmered. I called Detective Harris, who arrived and took pictures. "I'll file a vandalism report," he said. "But we both know who's behind this, and they're likely too cowardly to leave direct evidence." That only reinforced my conviction. These were intimidation tactics typical of corrupt organizations. Meanwhile, the FBI agents I contacted began to follow up. They arranged a phone interview with Colette, delving into her knowledge of Avery's bribes and the local officials on her payroll. I felt a glimmer of hope. They might connect the dots faster than I expected. In the background, the clock ticked toward Avery's assault trial. The HOA's reputation plummeted after news spread of her arrest. Some board members distanced themselves from her publicly, claiming they had no idea about her violent outburst. But a few close allies defended her, insisting she was just protecting property values. That line, property values, chilled me. How could it ever justify harming a child? At last, the day of trial arrived for the assault charge. The courtroom was smaller than I anticipated, benches lining both sides. Alexa and I sat near the front, accompanied by a victim advocate who gently explained each step. Avery arrived in a tailored suit. Her lawyer walked beside her, carrying a briefcase that looked stuffed with who knows what. As I stood to testify, my heart pounded so fiercely that I could hardly breathe. The prosecutor asked me to recount the events. I described the chalk drawing, Avery's screaming, the physical assault, twice, and Alexa's distress. Then, Alexa herself spoke in a hesitant, tearful voice, reliving the moment Avery struck her. The entire courtroom seemed to vibrate with tension. When it was Avery's turn to present her side, she claimed that she had lightly tapped Alexa out of frustration over vandalism, never intending to cause harm. She insisted Alexa was exaggerating. Her lawyer tried to paint me as a father who influenced his child to escalate a major altercation into a major criminal case. However, the multiple witness testimonies, Carl's phone video in particular, shattered that facade. In the footage, Avery's hand could be seen swinging with deliberate force, along with her shrill insult about Alexa's disability. The jury shifted in their seats, clearly disturbed. Avery's expression flickered, perhaps realizing her carefully spun narrative was unraveling. A day later, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the assault charge and recommended an enhanced penalty under disability hate crime statutes. Avery looked shell-shocked, but that paled in comparison to the fury I knew she'd harbor after sentencing. The judge placed her under strict bail conditions, pending sentencing, including a restraining order from contacting Alexa or me. I exhaled, feeling a weight lift. Yet, the storm wasn't over. The bigger corruption scandal still loomed. Within a week, the FBI took definitive action. They raided the HOA office. Computers, files, and hard drives were seized. Local news stations swarmed Aurora Pines, interviewing neighbors about the abrupt federal presence. I kept a low profile, not wanting to compromise the ongoing investigation. Rumors flew that city council members were being questioned, and the mayor's office was under scrutiny for awarding Avery's husband suspicious building permits. The net was tightening. One evening, while Alexa was reading in bed, I got an unexpected knock at my door. It was Detective Harris again, accompanied by an FBI agent named Dawson. They shared the news. Avery and several associates had been indicted on charges of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to violate environmental protection laws. The agent told me they'd found numerous emails between Avery, local officials, and a large contracting company. Payments had been funneled through shell accounts. We also have new evidence about how they intimidated residents who opposed the wetlands development, Dawson added. It's enough to bring them all down. I slumped into a chair, relief coursing through me like a cool wave. Alexa peeked from the hallway, worried about the late-night visitors. I beckoned her over and introduced her. Detective Harris smiled gently, commending her bravery. It was a surreal moment. My mind flashed back to the day Avery slapped her, that humiliating and heartbreaking scene. Now, justice was knocking on Avery's door with the full force of federal indictment. I felt a measure of closure. But Alexa, with childlike innocence, asked softly, "Will Ms. Lockhart ever say she's sorry?" The agent gave me a look, uncertain how to answer. I squeezed Alexa's hand and said, "Sometimes people don't say sorry when they're caught, but what matters is they're stopped so they can't hurt anyone else." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Avery faced additional federal charges, her high-profile attorney scrambling for a plea deal. The mayor's office was rocked by multiple resignations. A city council member was arrested. The once impenetrable aura surrounding Aurora Pines estates shattered. HOA members who had been loyal to Avery either resigned or tried to salvage their reputations by cooperating with investigators. The wetlands project was halted. Environmental experts were brought in to assess damage. The immediate threat to the ecosystem was paused, allowing local fauna some breathing room. Residents, now free from Avery's oppression, started organizing an environmental cleanup. Neighbors who once barely acknowledged each other began bonding over the shared relief that Avery's tyranny was over. Alexa, for her part, had her own emotional recovery to handle. She returned to her chalk drawings, though she now preferred to create them in the backyard. A part of her still felt unsafe in the front yard. I respected that boundary, letting her heal at her own pace. We often talked about how some people misuse power. We discussed how the law can protect the vulnerable when used correctly. She seemed proud that her father worked for the Department of Justice, though she also asked why it took so long to stop Avery. All I could do was explain that justice can be slow but is persistent when truth is on its side. Sentencing day arrived for Avery's assault conviction. She appeared in court looking thinner, her usual confidence drained. The judge gave her a 1-year jail term for the assault and the hate crime enhancement. There would be probation afterward and mandatory anger management counseling. The federal corruption trial was still pending, so her future looked even bleaker. As she stood to be escorted out, I caught a glimpse of pure resentment in her eyes, but she said nothing. In that instant I remembered how she had strutted around Aurora Pines, believing herself untouchable. Now she had no more illusions of grandeur. On the sidewalk outside the courthouse, Alexa and I stepped into the crisp afternoon air. Reporters were milling about, eager for statements. I shielded Alexa from the cameras. One journalist approached, microphone in hand, asking if we felt justice had been served. I glanced at my daughter, then replied quietly, "It's a start. No one else will face the fear we did. The justice system is holding her accountable. That's what matters." The reporter nodded. We slipped away, not wanting to stand in the limelight any longer. In the following weeks, the mood in Aurora Pines was markedly different. The new acting HOA president was a retired teacher named Glenna Brock, who publicly vowed to restore integrity and compassion to the association. She sent a personal apology letter to Alexa, along with a set of chalks in every color imaginable. Alexa smiled when she opened that package. I could see some of her old spark returning. The ramp Avery loathed so much remained right where it was. Ironically, Glenna proposed adding more accessible features around the neighborhood to accommodate residents with disabilities. A lot can change when fear is lifted. The FBI investigation into the wetlands scandal continued, but the initial findings indicated that the environment might be spared from the disastrous condo development. The contract had been canceled. The land was returning to protected status under state law. My name was listed as a cooperating witness, but I tried to avoid too much involvement due to the personal angle. Regardless, I felt a sense of triumph. Not only had Alexa's assailant been punished, but the larger scheme behind that cruelty was being dismantled piece by piece. Eventually, Avery's husband fled the state. Rumors suggested he was indicted for fraud, but I never confirmed the details. The once feared Lockhart family name was now synonymous with disgrace. Many questioned how such corruption had infiltrated the community. Others pointed out that they once admired Avery's organization skills, failing to realize those skills were weaponized for selfish ends. I was just grateful our neighbors were waking up to the fact that an HOA exists to serve everyone, not to act as a private kingdom. One evening, well after the chaos subsided, Alexa and I were in the backyard. The sky was ablaze with a late summer sunset. Oranges and pinks blended into the horizon. She was drawing a mural on the patio, a large butterfly with intricate details. I knelt beside her, remarking on the delicate shading. She used subtle transitions to mimic real wings. "Dad," she said gently, "I'm glad we stayed. I like it here when people aren't mean." I smiled, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Me too," I whispered. "I'm proud of you for staying strong." She gave me a tiny grin, then went back to coloring. In that small scene, just me, my daughter, and a quiet backyard, I felt the culmination of countless battles. And I realized we'd faced adversity that could have crushed us, but we endured. We found victory by standing up, refusing to be silenced. The final blow to Avery's empire came when federal indictments were handed down to several city officials. Evidence of bribes and backroom deals was overwhelming. The wetlands were spared permanent damage. A coalition of residents formed an environmental task force to monitor the area. Over time, wildlife returned in greater numbers. Children once again played in front yards without fear of petty fine. People walked their dogs, smiling at each other instead of casting nervous glances. And Alexa roamed with her wheelchair, unafraid of incurring the wrath of an HOA tyrant. Months later, a small ceremony was held by the new HOA board, celebrating the transformation of Aurora Pines. They invited me to speak, though I was hesitant to stand in front of everyone. Still, Alexa urged me to do so. She said people needed to hear how we overcame injustice. So I spoke, choosing my words carefully. I began. We discover that our community isn't what we thought. We uncover cruelty, corruption, and intimidation hidden beneath polite smiles and well-kept lawns. We face those who think they're above the law, who believe they can bully the vulnerable. But that's when we stand together. That's when we fight for what's right. My daughter and I went through a terrible ordeal here, and I won't pretend it was easy. Yet this place is our home. And I believe that every home, every neighborhood, we can become a sanctuary if the people living in it stand against injustice and refuse to let fear rule their hearts. There was a hush, followed by applause. Alexa received a small gift from the board, a handcrafted plaque with her name on it, honoring her for the courage she showed. She beamed proudly, tears shining in her eyes. In that moment, I felt an immense wave of gratitude wash over me. We'd traveled from fear to relief, from assault to accountability, from corruption to restoration. And though my job with the Department of Justice put me in conflict with powerful wrongdoers, I saw firsthand that real power is found in unity and resilience. Not long after, as I was straightening up the living room, I came across the old letter from the HOA that threatened us for the chalk drawing. Reading it again gave me chills. It reminded me of the intimidation Avery wielded, but it also reminded me that we fought back and won. I tore the letter in half and tossed it into the recycling bin. We were done living in that shadow. When Alexa asked me about forgiveness, I told her that was a personal choice. She wondered if Avery would ever realize how wrong she was. I couldn't answer that. Some people change, some never do. The legal system punishes wrongdoing, but it doesn't automatically transform hearts. Still, I hoped that in time, Avery might see that her actions caused needless suffering, and that no one is above the law. Whether or not that day would come wasn't my concern anymore. My job was to protect Alexa and uphold justice wherever I could. In subsequent weeks, life settled into a tranquil routine. Alexa returned to school, focusing on her therapy sessions, improving her range of motion. She began painting canvases in addition to her chalk art. Sometimes neighbors would stop by to admire her work. Harriet, the retired teacher next door, even helped us organize a small charity sale for Alexa's paintings, raising funds for disability awareness programs. The sense of solidarity was heartwarming. Occasionally, I found myself thinking about the wetlands and how close they came to being destroyed. Without the combined efforts of honest citizens, activists, and law enforcement, Avery's plan could have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Now, the area would remain a haven for wildlife, a testament to what happens when truth prevails. Alexa and I plan to attend a community cleanup day in the wetlands, picking up litter, planting native vegetation. She was excited about seeing the beavers and squirrels again, squealing with anticipation whenever we approached the tree line. I couldn't help but smile at her joy. This was the kind of life I wanted for her, a life unburdened by bullies and power, a life where she could thrive without fear. One morning, we woke early to watch the sunrise from the backyard. The sky slowly brightened, the clouds painting themselves pink and gold. Alexa sipped hot cocoa, I nursed a cup of coffee. She turned to me and said, "Dad, do you ever regret moving here?" I took a moment to consider. "Sometimes," I admitted. But then I remember all the good that's come out of this, how people rallied around each other, how the wetlands were saved, and how we exposed something evil. I wouldn't trade that victory for anything. She nodded, her gaze drifting to a new chalk drawing near the edge of the patio. This time it was a large heart shape, half filled with swirling galaxies and half filled with bright flowers. 181. She was bridging two worlds, light and darkness, fear and hope. The journey was long and painful, but it led us to a place of understanding. Communities can be reclaimed. Justice can be served. The vulnerable can be protected if enough people care. And with each rising sun, Alexa and I continued to shape Aurora Pines into a place worth living in, one chalk drawing at a time.